Kumar Kortiwada. In this video, we will see about basic template driven forms in Angular. To understand more about ng model in Angular, please try to watch my previous video for better understanding. Let me quickly jump into Visual Studio Code. So in the previous video, we have observed how to handle all the two-way bindings in Angular. In this video, we will try to create a form and we will try to access the values from the form. Let me go to app.component.html. Here I have already created a project called Angular tutorial, and in this project I have created a app component which is a default component for my application. And let me go to the HTML file and let me create one form. A form which is having an input field that is with a placeholder as username, and also let me break this into two lines, and again let me create an input field with a placeholder like password, and let me give the type is equal to text, and here let me give the password type equal to password. So these are the two input elements which I have created. Let me save this and let me run the application first, ngServe. By the time the application is running, what I'll do is I'll create one more break statement and one more break statement. Here what I'll do is I'll create a button. The button should be something like login. Let me give login button and save this. So here we have created our button and the two input fields which need to be triggered whenever my login has been clicked. Let me go to the browser and let me reload the application. If you see here, I got username and password. When I type something inside the fields, I'm not getting any value, whereas even in the password, when I type something, it is not giving any password. So what I want to do is I want to capture the user entered values inside that fields whenever the user clicks on this login button. So for that sake, what we can do is we can try to use ng model. Let me create ng model without the naming conventions. That means I don't want to use any controller values. I am directly giving ng model, and let me save this. So if you go to the application, it has been ran successfully, but let me inspect this one. So if you see the inspector one, you are not seeing any errors. That's fine. So let me go back, and after that, let me try to create one more ng model, and let me save this and let me create one click event, click event and login. So let me create this method inside my TS file. Go to the TS file and create the login method. So let me save this and let me save this. So my application has been run successfully. So now what I want to do is I want to access this form field values. For that sake, we can create an ID for this form. So let me create login form, and this is of type ngForm. ngForm is the directive which is given by Angular. So our element will act like an ng form, that means Angular form. Let me save this. You are able to see some error, no directive found with export as ng form. Why? Because whenever you are using ng form, it is not known property for this particular form field. So this directive is not acting because we have not imported the module which is related for forms. Let me import that forms module, and let me save this. If you see here, error has been removed. So I have created a form, I have created an ng model along with the login method. Let me go to the browser, and if you see here, again we got one more error. If ng model is used within a form tag, either the name attribute must be set or the form control must be defined as a standalone. So what it is telling is whenever I'm trying to use ng model, it is trying to say this ng model has been used inside the form. So always please prefer to give a name. Let me give this name. For example, I'm giving a name as username. Let me save this, and if you go back, even now also we got an error, but this time only one error that is also related to our password field. So what it is saying here, they gave an example like ng model with person.first name. We can use either this way or else ng model options with a name. Here they have assigned the name, or we can use ng model options. We learn about ng model options in couple of minutes. For now, let me give a name as password. Name equal to password. Save this, and if you go back, errors has been resolved. And now let me type something in the username, Sai. So when I give Sai, it is taking as Sai, and when I try to give the password, it is giving the password. And when I click on the login, now I want to access that particular variables. Is that particular variables or the models has been binded with our component? No, it has not been binded with our controller. So we cannot access that directly in our TypeScript file. So what we can do is, instead of accessing directly, we can pass this login form into our login method, and this login method has been called in our TS. So let me use some form details which is of any, and here we will be getting that form details, console.log of form details. I am passing that form details as login form. That means we are able to send the data from HTML to our TypeScript file. That means I am sending whole form details. And let me go back and refresh this. Let me give the values for this particular model values. So let me give Kumar, and let me give the password as Sai. So I give Sai as a password and Kumar as the username. Let me click on the login. Here we are able to see whole ng form. That means the form which we are using this particular element. That means I am sending all these forms. In this form, each and every input field, that means each and every ng model will act as a control. If you see this object, you have ng form, we have a form, and inside this form we have two controls, that is our username and password. In future, if you create some other input fields or some other values with this ng model, then they are acting as a form controls. And if you open this password, how we are getting this password label? The password label is getting from this name. If you try to change this name as 123 and save the value, go back and try to give some values, Kumar, and also let me give some password and click on the login. If you see now, the password has been changed to password 123. The controls will be using this name as a control name, as we are not giving any control names from our TypeScript. Here we have used something called as click event. Instead of click event, Angular even gave one more inbuilt method or inbuilt event, that is nothing but ng submit. And here we can use this login here itself, and we can remove this click event. We can give type is equal to submit. So whenever my login type is submit, it will always refer to the ng submit. Whenever I click this login button, it goes into a function which is defined for this ng submit. Let me save this and go back. If you clear this and let me give Kumar and also let me give Sai. Let me click on login. If you see here, even now also we got this ng form along with the form. And if you see here, ng submit, it has been triggered by using ng submit, and this form has been submitted. So this submitted value became true. How to access each and every value? For example, if I want to access only the value which is present inside our username or password 123, then how can I access? Before accessing that, let me revert this into password and save this. Now what I want to do is, whenever the user clicks on the submit, I want to access that particular username and the password. For example, console.log of form details dot, we can use something called as form. Inside the form we have something like controls. So whatever we are seeing in the controls, that is an object, so we can use username. So let me use like this, because username is not yet properly defined inside our ng form. So I can use username dot value, or let me try to access username itself. Let me save this, and in the same way I can access our password also. Save this, and to differentiate this, let me give a string like username, and also here let me give a string called as password and save this. So let me go back and try to type something Kumar, and also let me give Sai and click on login. So it has been submitted. Now this is our form control. That means each and every ng model is acting as a form control. So if you see this, we got some values. Let me show you these values errors. This field does not have any errors, and status, it is a valid status. We will see about validations and errors in the next upcoming videos. For now, let's focus on this value. So the value, whatever I have entered here, that value has been captured inside a property called as value. And if you go down, we have one more control, that is a password control. And if you see the password control, the value is Sai. So if you want to access a form control values, we can use a property called as value. So I can use dot value, and also here let me use dot value. Let me save this and go back here. Let me enter some values, Kumar and Sai. Let me click on login. So if you see here, I got Kumar as well as Sai because I'm trying to access only the values. So now here what we have used the individual controlled values. Now here in this case, I want to access whole values. That means I can use dot value on the form itself. Let me give dot form dot value. So it will give the object format of whole values. That means username as well as password inside a object format. Let me go back and let me give some value, Kumar and Sai. Let me click on login. If you see here, we got username and the password. If you see, it is a object format. That means each and every ng model will be inserted into that form object, and that form object can be accessed by using form values. So that is how we can use our ng model inside our forms. Now let's see an alternate option for the same form. So for example, let me create one more form. And here what I want to do is I want to create a ng model values, but not with the name property. For example, let me give confirm form. There is a form called as confirm form, and it is also a type of ng form. Inside this form, let me create two input fields. Let me give input field with a placeholder as password, and let me give a type as password. And also I have a two break statements. Let me use one more input field where the placeholder is new password, and also type as password. So these are the two more input fields we have. Let me break again two times, and now what I want to do is I'll create a button, and inside this button what I'll do is confirm button btn. So I can use confirm btn, and here also I'll use a type as submit. The submit, whenever the user clicks on the submit, we will be emitting a event called as ng submit, and whenever the user clicks on the ng submit, we have to access the values. So whenever I'm trying to access these values, that means confirm method. So I have a method called as confirm method, and let me copy this confirm method and define inside our TypeScript file. Let me go to this TypeScript and access the confirm values colon any, and also let me pass our ng form, that means confirm form element, to my confirm method. And also this one we have already defined here, and let me save this and save this. Along with that, let me try to access the values, console.log of confirm value dot form dot value. So I'm trying to access these values, but here we didn't defined our name property or name attribute inside our input field. So our expectation is we need to get an error, that is a name property has not been defined for the elements which are inside the form. Let me reload. There is no error. Why? Because we have not defined our ng models. Let me define our ng model values. So let me give ng model attribute or directive to our input fields, and let me save this. Now we will be getting an error, that is if ng model is within the form tag, either the name attribute must be set to the form, or form control must be defined as standalone. That means we have saw the first case, that means giving a name. But now in this case what we want to do is we want to give a another option which is given by Angular, that is nothing but ng model options. So what I'll do is I'll create a property binding, that is nothing but ng model options. This is given by Angular itself. There is a property binding which is ng model option attribute. For this we can pass an object that is stand alone, and whenever we pass this true, this error will be gone. Let me copy the same one and let me paste here. Let me save this. The problem by using ng model option is, let me go to the browser and errors has been lost, and let me try to enter some data, sample, and also I gave sample. Let me click on confirm button. If you see here, the object is empty. Why it is empty? Because these forms are standalone. That means the input fields whatever we are entered inside the form are not belonging to this form. What this standalone is doing, it is telling our Angular that this input field is not belonging to this particular form. So always try to avoid using ng model options until unless your input field does not belongs to that form or that form object. So in this case, we are not able to get the values. This is how we can use our ng model option values. And let me demonstrate in more details. Let me remove this property and let me give name is equal to some name. So I gave some name. Let me save this. If you go back and see, enter some values, Sai and Sai, hit enter. If you see here, we got some name, but we didn't got empty. Why? Because the input field is having ng model options as standalone. That value has not been triggered. Only the value with the name attribute has been triggered. So this is how we can use our template driven forms only at the HTML level without communicating with our TypeScript. Now, in this, we have a problem. Here, the problem is whenever we want to assign the ng model values from the TypeScript, there is a lot of changes we need to do, and there is no direct communication between this TypeScript as well as HTML with that particular model. We have to access that form variables only by using ngForm and by using this element, and whenever the user clicks on submit. So that is one of the problem which we have in this particular format. And there is one more way where ng model options is also used. For example, here whenever I type the values will be getting updated. In some cases, if you don't want to update the values simultaneously, then there is an option like ng model options where you can use a property called as update, and this update when you want to have it. For example, let me use blur event. We got an error. There is a small mistake in the spelling. Update on. Let me use update on event. So we have update on event. Let me save this. When I want to update this particular modal value, whenever there is a blur event happening on this input field. So to understand that, there is a event which can be triggered on this input field, that is nothing but input. But Angular has provided one more action event, that is nothing but ng modal change. So whenever there is a change happening to this modal, it will be triggered. So let me use change event, and here let me try to pass the form itself. So let me pass the login form. Let me copy the change event and pass here inside this change event. Here let me use one form, that means confirm form, or anything whatever you want to pass the data you can pass. And here what I am doing is I am passing the login form. Whole login form will be triggered here. Let me try to console the values. That means confirm form dot value. So if you see this value on the change, that means whenever I'm changing this value, it should not be affected. My ng model value, that means login form value, should not be changed. Why? Because the value should be updated only on the blur event. Let me go back and clear the console. Let me give Kumar and click on blur. Here if you see, we have encountered the whole values, that means username and the password. Here my username is getting updated only on the blur event. So that is the reason, until unless I am making it as blur, my ng modal on change is not calling. If you see here 1 2 3 not called, and when I click outside, the method has been called. But in the normal cases, for example, if I'm not passing this ng modal option, let me use the same ng modal change on my password, where my password is updating on the fly. That means there is no particular condition or restriction for the updation of this ng model. Let me save this and go back and clear this. Let me give some value Kumar, and whenever I focus out, that means blur, my value has been updated. Now what I want to do is, password has no restriction, so it has to be updated whenever I enter some value. So I'm entering KUMAR. If you see here, for every key up, my value has been called. That means it is acting like a on change event, which is used in our JavaScript. So in the same way, we can use ngModal change, and ngModal change is a method which will be triggered whenever our input value with that ngModal is changed. This method will be triggered. But whenever we want to use or update the values only when on a particular restricted events like blur focus, then we can use ngModal options. This is how we can use our forms in Angular. And the advanced level of forms like passing the data from the controller and accessing the data from the HTML at a time with a two-way binding, we'll try to explain in the next session. Hope you guys like my video. If you like my video, please like, share, subscribe to my channel for more updates. Signing off. Thank you.